Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Kristen Smith. In a report issued by the Center for Rural Pennsylvania, disparities in domestic violence reporting between rural and urban communities reveals stark differences in the experiences of survivors. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Christina Linjo. Christina, what does this report tell us about how domestic violence reporting in rural communities is different?
It really tells us that the barriers to reporting are different across the board in both rural and urban communities, both in Pennsylvania and nationally. Reporting is not great for domestic violence. There are a lot of reasons behind that, but we're seeing different obstacles in rural communities, largely that come from the sort of tight-knit groups that exist there. Victims, survivors of domestic violence in rural communities have talked about concerns for their abuse to be made public in a pretty small community situation. They've also expressed concern about jobs, housing, their economic future when they're living in such a small community with their abuser. There's concerns about whether or not the police will take them seriously and whether or not the police will keep the information private. So yeah, they're struggling with a lot because of the sort of isolation that they can encounter being in a small community where moving or something like that is not as accessible of a choice.
The Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence has a lot of insight into this issue. So can you explain what this organization is and how they help?
So the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence is a victim service organization. They have 41 centers in rural communities, specifically, and 59 across the state. They work with victims to identify whatever they need, whether that's like counseling, legal aid, to just educate and inform them and respond to their situation.
Can you talk a little bit more about victim service organizations and what impact they have?
They can have a pretty big impact in helping victims access the services they need, whether that's counseling, housing, legal services. One of the obstacles is that people don't really know that these things exist. So one of the major challenges is getting victim service organizations, which are coming from this trauma-informed background and know how to approach these situations with the sort of sensitivity that is required. Just making sure that people know that they exist is one of the obstacles.
So what are some recommendations to encourage more reporting in rural areas?
First and foremost, the researcher who compiled this particular study suggests that police need increased training in trauma-sensitive work, and the community really needs to be able to build back the sense of trust in law enforcement, because you see a lot of people who think that it doesn't help or it makes things worse, or a lot of people are afraid, even if they don't want to experience domestic violence, they also don't necessarily want their partner potentially getting hurt if they call 911. They don't want their partner potentially going to jail for the rest of their lives. They just kind of want to be made safe. So a big part of it is developing trust between the police and the community. And then another part of it is helping the police connect to those victim services organizations so that, a really full response can occur. They've also recommended changing the law so that domestic violence is its own crime separate from harassment or assault, because currently there is no distinct crime when it's with an intimate partner. And they think that, changing the actual legal definition could help people be just more aware of the problem itself.
Christina, thanks for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.